I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Brenda Kensington standing on my front porch with her clipboard. Her lips pressed into that thin line that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. It was a Tuesday morning in late March, and I had just finished watching my contractor, Miguel Santos, install the most beautiful storm door I had ever seen on my house in Riverside Meadows, a subdivision just outside Columbus, Ohio. The door was a deep charcoal gray with elegant glass panels that let natural light flood into my entryway, while providing an extra layer of insulation and security. Miguel had done an absolutely pristine job, and I was standing there admiring his work when Brenda's white Lexus pulled into my driveway like she owned the place. "Zachary Thompson," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of false sweetness that made my stomach drop. "I need to speak with you about your recent home modification." I glanced at Miguel, who was packing up his tools. He gave me a sympathetic look that told me he had dealt with HOA dragons before. I walked down my front steps to meet Brenda halfway, trying to maintain my composure. "Good morning, Brenda. What can I do for you?" I kept my voice neutral, professional. She flipped through the papers on her clipboard with theatrical precision. "I received a report this morning that you installed a storm door without prior approval from the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee. As you know, per Section 7.3 of our CC and Articles, any exterior modifications require written approval at least 30 days before installation." My jaw tightened. "Brenda, it's a storm door. It's the same color as my front door, which is already approved." I checked the guidelines, and there's nothing in there that specifically mentions storm doors. "All exterior modifications," she repeated, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "That includes doors, windows, shutters, mailboxes, and any other visible changes to the exterior appearance of your home. I'm afraid you're in violation, Zachary. You'll need to remove it immediately and submit the proper paperwork if you wish to reinstall." Miguel had finished loading his truck and walked over. "Excuse me, madam, but I've installed storm doors in about 15 neighborhoods in the Columbus area, and I've never had an HOA require pre-approval for something like this. They're considered maintenance items in most communities." Brenda's expression hardened. "Well, this is Riverside Meadows and we maintain higher standards. The door must come down within 48 hours or Mr. Thompson will be subject to daily fines of $100 until compliance is achieved." She handed me a violation notice, turned on her heel, and walked back to her Lexus without another word. I stood there holding the paper, feeling my blood pressure rising with each passing second. "Man, I'm sorry," Miguel said, shaking his head. "I've been doing this for 12 years, and that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That door looks fantastic, and it's exactly the kind of upgrade that increases property values." "It's fine, Miguel. This isn't on you. This is just Brenda being Brenda." I looked at the violation notice, noting the date and time stamp. She must have been watching my house, waiting for me to do something she could nail me for. "Can you hold off on your final invoice for a few days? I'm going to fight this." "Absolutely. Let me know if you need anything. I'll write up a statement about industry standards if it helps." Miguel climbed into his truck, and I watched him drive away before going inside to figure out my next move. The Riverside Meadows HOA had been a thorn in my side since I bought my house 2 years ago. The neighborhood itself was beautiful, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes, but the HOA board, led by Brenda Kensington and her cronies, seemed to take pleasure in making residents' lives miserable. I had received violation notices for my grass being a 1/4 inch too long, for having my garbage cans visible from the street for 30 minutes past the allowed time, and for hanging a wreath on my door that was apparently the wrong shade of green for the holiday season. I spent the rest of that Tuesday afternoon combing through the Riverside Meadows CC and Artiques, which stood for covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The document was 87 pages of dense legal language that seemed designed to give the HOA board maximum power over every aspect of homeowner life. Section 7.3 did indeed state that exterior modifications required approval, but the examples given were things like additions, deck construction, fence installation, and exterior paint color changes. Storm doors weren't mentioned anywhere in the document. I pulled up my laptop and started researching Ohio HOA law. What I found was interesting. While HOAs in Ohio had broad authority to enforce their rules, they were also required to act reasonably and in good faith. Arbitrary or capricious enforcement could be challenged in court. I also discovered that many courts had ruled that maintenance items like storm doors, screen doors, and standard shutters didn't require pre-approval unless the CC and Artiques specifically mentioned them. Armed with this information, I drafted a formal response to the violation notice. I cited the lack of specific language regarding storm doors in the CC and Artiques, referenced several Ohio court cases that supported my position, and requested a hearing before the full HOA board to present my case. I also noted that my storm door was tasteful, matched my existing front door, and enhanced my home's energy efficiency and security, all things that should be encouraged rather than punished. I submitted my response through the HOA's online portal Wednesday morning and waited. The response came faster than I expected. By Wednesday afternoon, I had an email from Brenda informing me that my request for a hearing had been granted and would take place the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. She also reminded me that the 48-hour removal deadline still applied, and that I would begin accruing fines on Thursday morning. I immediately responded that I would not be removing the door pending the hearing, as I believed I was in full compliance with the CC and Artiques as written. I also stated that any fines levied would be contested, and that I reserved all my legal rights. Thursday came and went. Friday brought another notice from the HOA, this time informing me that I was being fined $100 per day starting that day, and that the fines would continue until I complied with the removal order. I filed the notice away with my growing collection of HOA documents and continued preparing for Tuesday's hearing over the weekend. Something interesting happened. My neighbor directly across the street, Dennis Palmer, came over Saturday morning while I was working in my garage. "Hey, Zachary, I heard about your storm door situation," he said, glancing around as if checking for surveillance. "I just wanted to say that I think what Brenda's doing is complete garbage. That door looks great, and I was actually thinking about getting one myself until I heard about your violation notice. Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate the support. I'm fighting it at the board meeting Tuesday. Good. And listen, there are a lot of people in this neighborhood who are sick of Brenda's power trips. If you need character witnesses or anything like that, let me know. I think you'd be surprised how many people would back you up." That conversation planted a seed in my mind. I spent Sunday afternoon walking around the neighborhood, really looking at the houses. What I discovered was eye-opening. At least 7 other homes had storm doors. 3 of them had been there since before I moved in. 2 others appeared to have been installed within the past year. I took photographs of every single one, making sure to capture the house numbers and the distinctive features of each door. Then, I went home and did some digging through public records and the HOA's own architectural approval archives, which were available to homeowners through the online portal. What I found was explosive. None of the existing storm doors in the neighborhood had formal approval on file. Not a single one. Either they had been installed without approval, just like mine, or they had been approved through some informal process that wasn't properly documented. Either way, the HOA was engaging in selective enforcement, which was exactly the kind of arbitrary and capricious behavior that Ohio courts frowned upon. Monday evening, I put together a presentation. I printed out the relevant sections of the CC and Articles with my analysis, the Ohio court cases I had found, and photographs of all the other storm doors in the neighborhood with property addresses clearly visible. I also printed out screenshots of the Architectural Approval Archive showing no approvals for any of these doors. I organized everything into a neat binder and made copies for each of the 5 board members. Tuesday evening arrived, and I drove to the Riverside Meadows clubhouse with my presentation materials and a recording device. Ohio is a one-party consent state, meaning I could legally record the meeting as long as I was present. I wanted a clear record of everything that was said. The clubhouse meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members sat and rows of chairs for residents. I was surprised to see that about 20 people had shown up, including Dennis Palmer and several other neighbors I recognized. Brenda sat in the center of the board table, flanked by the other 4 board members: Patricia Whitmore, Susan Hendricks, Robert Chen, and Margaret Fletcher. Brenda called the meeting to order at precisely 7 o'clock. We have several items on tonight's agenda, but first we'll be hearing the appeal of Zachary Thompson regarding the violation notice issued for his unauthorized storm door installation. Mr. Thompson, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, distributing my binders to the board members. Thank you for hearing my appeal. I've prepared materials that I believe clearly demonstrate that I am in compliance with the Riverside Meadows CC and Articles, and that the violation notice was issued in error. I walked them through my argument methodically. I showed them the section of the CC and Articles that dealt with architectural modifications, and pointed out that storm doors were not specifically mentioned. I presented the Ohio court cases that established precedent for maintenance items not requiring pre-approval. Then, I dropped the bombshell: the photographs of the 7 other storm doors in the neighborhood. As you can see, there are currently at least 7 other homes in Riverside Meadows with storm doors. I've checked the Architectural Approval Archive, and none of these doors have approval on file. This represents a clear case of selective enforcement, which Ohio courts have repeatedly ruled violates the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing that governs HOA actions. Brenda's face had gone from pink to red to nearly purple. Those doors were installed by previous owners before the current board took office. We can't be held responsible for inadequate record-keeping by previous administrations. With respect, Brenda, that's not accurate. I pulled out another set of photographs. These 2 homes, 847 Maple Ridge Drive and 923 Oak Haven Court, have storm doors that were clearly installed within the past year based on wear patterns and the style of the doors, which match current models available at local home improvement stores. The families living at those addresses moved in after I did. The room went silent. Robert Chen, who I knew was an attorney in his day job, cleared his throat. Brenda, I think we need to table this matter and conduct a proper investigation. If what Mr. Thompson is saying is accurate, we have a significant problem with inconsistent enforcement. "We don't need to table anything," Brenda snapped. "The violation stands." "Actually, I disagree." Robert looked uncomfortable but determined. This could expose the association to significant legal liability. Mr. Thompson clearly has grounds for a discrimination claim if we're allowing other homeowners to have storm doors while forcing him to remove his. Margaret Fletcher, an older woman who usually stayed quiet during meetings, nodded. "I agree with Robert, and frankly, I don't see what the problem is with storm doors in the first place. They're attractive and practical." "The problem is that Mr. Thompson didn't follow proper procedures," Brenda insisted. "This is about process, not aesthetics." "But if we haven't required anyone else to follow that process for storm doors, then we've effectively established that storm doors don't require pre-approval," Robert countered. "We can't suddenly change that interpretation for one homeowner without changing it for everyone." The debate continued for another 20 minutes. Patricia Whitmore and Susan Hendricks sided with Brenda, arguing that rules were rules and that I should have asked permission first. Robert and Margaret argued that selective enforcement was legally indefensible. Finally, Robert made a motion to rescind the violation notice pending a comprehensive review of the neighborhood's existing storm doors and the development of clear guidelines going forward. Margaret seconded. The vote was 3-2 against me, with Brenda, Patricia, and Susan voting to uphold the violation. I had lost, but it was closer than I expected. "The violation stands," Brenda announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Mr. Thompson, you have until Friday at 5 p.m. to remove the storm door. After that, fines will resume and increase to $150 per day for continued non-compliance." I gathered my materials and left the meeting, feeling frustrated but not defeated. Dennis Palmer caught up with me in the parking lot. "That was complete garbage, man. Brenda had her mind made up before you even walked in the room." "Yeah, but at least Robert and Margaret saw reason. That gives me options." "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to call a lawyer." "If they want to play hardball, we'll play hardball." Wednesday morning, I contacted Marcus Wu, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Columbus, and he agreed to meet with me that afternoon. I brought all my documentation, including the recording of Tuesday night's meeting. Marcus listened to everything, reviewed my materials, and then leaned back in his chair with a slight smile. "This is about as clear-cut a case of selective enforcement as I've ever seen. The question is how you want to proceed. We have several options." He laid out a strategy. First, we would send a formal demand letter to the HOA, outlining the legal deficiencies in their position and demanding that they rescind the violation notice and all associated fines. If they refused, we would file a complaint in the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas seeking declaratory judgment that my storm door was in compliance with the CC and Articus, and an injunction preventing the HOA from assessing fines. We would also seek attorney's fees and costs. "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked. "The demand letter is straightforward, probably around $500. If we have to file suit, figure between $5,000 and $10,000 for the full litigation, but there's a good chance we'll recover most or all of that from the HOA if we prevail." "Based on what you've shown me, I'd say our chances are better than 90%. I thought about it for about 30 seconds. "Do it. Send the demand letter." Marcus had the letter drafted and sent by end of business Wednesday. It was a masterpiece of legal writing, politely but firmly eviscerating the HOA's position and giving them 10 days to respond. I felt a surge of satisfaction when I got the confirmation that it had been delivered to Brenda, the HOA's registered agent. The response came faster than expected. Friday morning, I received an email from Brenda, and the tone was noticeably different from her previous communications. She informed me that the board would be holding an emergency executive session to discuss my demand letter, and that they would provide a formal response within the 10-day deadline. She also stated that the daily fines would be suspended pending the outcome of their deliberations. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. At least I wasn't hemorrhaging money while this got sorted out. The weekend passed quietly, but Monday brought an unexpected development. I was in my backyard working on some landscaping when I heard my doorbell ring. I walked around to the front of the house and found Patricia Whitmore standing on my porch. She was one of the board members who had voted against me, and I wasn't sure what to expect. "Patricia, what can I do for you?" She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Zachary, I wanted to apologize for the other night. After the meeting, Robert and Margaret showed me some information about HOA liability that I wasn't aware of. I think we made a mistake." I invited her in, offering her coffee, which she accepted. We sat in my living room, and she explained that Robert had sent the entire board detailed information about Ohio HOA law and case precedents related to selective enforcement. He had also pointed out that the association's insurance policy might not cover litigation costs if the board was found to have acted in bad faith. "Brenda is furious with Robert for sending that information," Patricia said. "She thinks he's undermining her authority. But honestly, I don't want to get sued, and I certainly don't want my property values to go down because the HOA gets a reputation for being unreasonable. So what happens now? I honestly don't know. Brenda is dug in. She sees this as a matter of principle now. But Susan is wavering, and if she flips, that's a majority to rescind the violation." Patricia took a sip of her coffee. "I also wanted to ask you something, and I completely understand if you don't want to answer. Who did you use for your storm door installation? It really does look fantastic." There it was, the first crack in the dam. His name is Miguel Santos. He runs a small contracting company called Santos Home Improvements. He does amazing work at reasonable prices. Patricia pulled out her phone and made a note. "Thank you. My storm door is original to the house, and it's falling apart. I was going to hire someone from one of those big box stores, but the quotes I got were outrageous, and the quality looked questionable." After Patricia left, I texted Miguel to give him a heads up that he might get a call. Then I settled in to wait and see what the HOA board would do. The formal response came on Thursday, exactly 1 week after Marcus sent the demand letter. I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Henderson and Associates. The letter acknowledged receipt of my demand letter and stated that the board was conducting a thorough review of the matter. However, they were not prepared to rescind the violation at this time and requested an extension to respond. Marcus called me after receiving his copy of the letter. "This is actually good news. They're stalling because they know they're in trouble. The fact that they lawyered up means they're taking this seriously. My guess is their attorney has told them the same thing I told you, and now they're trying to figure out how to back down without losing face. So what do? We give them a little more rope. I'll respond agreeing to a reasonable extension, say another 10 days. If they still won't budge after that, we file suit." The waiting game continued. During this time, something interesting was happening in the neighborhood. The story of my HOA battle had spread, and I was becoming something of a folk hero among residents who had their own grievances with Brenda's board. People stopped me during walks to offer encouragement. Dennis Palmer organized a neighborhood happy hour at his house, and about 15 households showed up, many sharing their own HOA horror stories. At that gathering, I met Linda Morrison, who lived 3 streets over. She told me about how the HOA had forced her to repaint her entire house because her shade of beige was supposedly not on the approved color list, even though it was virtually identical to the shade on several other houses. The repainting had cost her over $8,000. "I wish I had fought it like you're doing," she said. "But I was new to the neighborhood and didn't know any better. Now I know that Brenda just targets people she thinks won't push back." The 10-day extension expired on a Wednesday. That morning, I received a call from Marcus. "You're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone with the HOA's attorney. They're proposing a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" "They'll rescind the violation notice and all fines in exchange for you submitting a retroactive architectural approval application for the storm door, which they'll immediately approve." Essentially, they're giving you what you want but framing it as a compromise where you agreed to follow the process. So they get to save face. Exactly. Personally, I think you should take it. You get your door, you don't pay any fines, and you don't have to spend the next 6 months litigating. Yes, you have to fill out some paperwork, but that's a small price to pay. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to push forward to force them to publicly admit they were wrong, but the practical part of me recognized that this was a win. Okay, let's do it. The settlement was finalized within a week. I submitted my retroactive application for the storm door, complete with photographs and specifications. 5 days later, I received official approval from the Architectural Review Committee. The violation notice was formally rescinded, and I received written confirmation that no fines were owed. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. About 2 weeks after the settlement, on a Saturday morning in early May, I was washing my car in the driveway when a silver Honda pulled up. A woman in her 40s got out, and I recognized her as Susan Hendricks, one of the board members who had initially voted against me. "Zachary, do you have a minute?" she called out. "Sure, what's up?" Susan walked over, looking sheepish. "I wanted to apologize for how the board handled your storm door situation. You were right, and we were wrong. Brenda was so insistent that you were violating the rules that the rest of us just went along with it without really thinking it through. I appreciate that, Susan. It wasn't fun going through all that, but at least it worked out in the end. That's actually why I'm here. I need to replace the storm door on my house. The one I have now is 20 years old and barely functional. I was wondering if you could give me the contact information for your contractor. I saw your door up close at the board meeting and the craftsmanship is excellent." I pulled out my phone and texted her Miguel's information. "His name is Miguel Santos. Tell him I referred you. He's professional, affordable, and his work is top-notch." Susan thanked me and left. I went back to washing my car, thinking about the irony of a board member who had voted to make me remove my door now wanting to hire the same contractor to install one on her house. But that wasn't the end of it. The following Tuesday, I got a call from an unknown number. "Hello, is this Zachary Thompson?" "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Margaret Fletcher from the HOA board. I'm so sorry to bother you at home, but I was hoping you could help me with something." Margaret explained that she was finally ready to replace her old wooden storm door, which had rotted out over the winter. She had gotten quotes from 3 different contractors, but they were either too expensive or the quality of their previous work, which she had checked out, was questionable. "Susan Hendricks mentioned that you used someone excellent for your installation. Would you be willing to share that contractor's information with me?" I gave her Miguel's details as well, and she was effusive in her thanks. After I hung up, I couldn't help but laugh. 3 board members, including 2 who had voted against me, were now trying to hire my contractor. I called Miguel to give him another heads up. "Man, You're about to get a lot of business from my neighborhood. Just keep doing the quality work you always do, and let's make sure these installations are absolutely perfect. You got it. And hey, I owe you. If even half of these calls turn into jobs, that's a significant boost to my business. The calls started coming in for Miguel over the next few days. Susan Hendricks contracted with him first, and he did her installation on a Thursday afternoon. I happened to drive by her house the next day, and the new storm door looked fantastic. It was a white door with decorative glass panels that matched her traditional colonial-style home perfectly. Margaret Fletcher's installation happened the following week. Miguel sent me a picture when he was done, and again, the quality was impeccable. The door was a rich mahogany color that complemented her brick facade beautifully. Then something unexpected happened. I got a call from Patricia Whitmore, the third board member. Zachary, I hate to be the third person to ask you this, but could I get your contractor's information as well? I hired someone from one of the big home improvement stores, and it was an absolute disaster. What happened? Patricia launched into a story about how the contractor from the chain store had showed up 3 hours late, spent maybe 90 minutes on the installation, and left her with a door that didn't close properly and had visible gaps around the frame. When she called to complain, they said they couldn't send anyone back out for 3 weeks, and even then, they would charge her an additional service fee. The door is letting in bugs and drafts, and I'm honestly worried about security. I saw Susan's door and Margaret's door, and they are both absolutely beautiful. I should have just used your contractor from the beginning instead of trying to save a few bucks. I gave her Miguel's number, and he went out to assess the situation that same afternoon. He called me afterward, sounding frustrated. Man, this installation is terrible. The frame isn't level, they used the wrong size screws, and they didn't properly seal around the edges. I'm going to have to basically tear it out and start over. Can you fix it? Absolutely, but it's going to take me most of a day instead of the few hours a proper installation would take. I gave her a fair price, though. It's not her fault the first contractor botched the job. Miguel did Patricia's installation 2 days later, on a Monday. I drove by that evening, and once again, the result was beautiful. The door was a charcoal gray similar to mine, with clean lines and professional finishing work that made it look like it had always been part of the house. The next day, I ran into Dennis Palmer at the neighborhood grocery store. "Dude, you're all anyone is talking about," he said with a grin. 3 HOA board members who tried to force you to remove your door are now using your contractor. The irony is not lost on anyone. It is pretty funny when you think about it. More than funny, it's justice. Brenda is apparently losing her mind over the whole thing. Patricia told my wife that Brenda tried to forbid the board members from using your contractor, but Patricia basically told her to pound sand. That image brought a smile to my face. The idea of Brenda Kensington realizing that her power trip had backfired so completely was deeply satisfying. A few days later, I saw Brenda herself while I was getting my mail. She was walking her small white dog, and when she saw me, she visibly stiffened. For a moment, I thought she might just walk past without saying anything, but instead she stopped. "I hope you're satisfied," she said coldly. "About what? You've turned half the board against me. You've undermined my authority and made me look foolish." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Brenda, I didn't do any of that. All I did was install a storm door on my own house and then defend my right to keep it when you issued a bogus violation notice. Everything that happened after that was the natural consequence of your actions, not mine. I was enforcing the rules. No, you were selectively enforcing the rules against me while ignoring the exact same situation on at least 7 other houses in this neighborhood. That's not enforcing rules. That's targeting someone. I don't have to listen to this. She turned to walk away. Actually, Brenda, I think you do. Because here's what I learned through this whole process. People in this neighborhood are tired of the power trips. They're tired of petty violation notices for things that don't matter. They're tired of being treated like children who need permission to do basic maintenance on homes they own. You had a choice when you saw my storm door. You could have said, "That looks nice, glad to see homeowners taking care of their properties." Instead, you decided to make it a federal case and it blew up in your face. Brenda's face was red, but I wasn't done. And now 3 board members, including 2 who initially sided with you, have seen firsthand how ridiculous your position was. They hired my contractor because my door looks great, and they realized that storm doors are exactly the kind of improvement that should be encouraged, not banned. So yeah, you did make yourself look foolish, but I had nothing to do with it. That was all you. I walked back to my house, leaving Brenda standing on the sidewalk. My hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but I felt good. I had said what needed to be said, and I had done it without losing my cool or being disrespectful. That evening, I got a call from Robert Chen, the board member who had been most supportive of my position from the beginning. "Zachary, I just wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's going to be a special board meeting next week to discuss changes to our architectural review process. Specifically, we're going to create a list of pre-approved modifications that don't require formal application and waiting periods. Storm doors are going to be on that list, along with things like mailbox replacement, house number signs, and minor landscaping." "That's great news, Robert. How did you get that through?" "After watching the disaster with your case and seeing 3 board members end up with beautiful storm doors from your contractor, it became pretty obvious that our current process is broken. Margaret and I have been working on this proposal for a couple of weeks, and Patricia and Susan are both on board. It's going to pass 4-1 even if Brenda votes against it." "What about Brenda? Is she going to fight it?" Robert sighed. "Between you and me, I think Brenda's time as HOA president is coming to an end. She's lost the confidence of most of the board, and annual elections are in 3 months. I've heard that at least 2 people are planning to run against her, and I'd be surprised if she wins." "Who's planning to run?" "I can't say for sure, but the rumors I'm hearing include Linda Morrison and Tom Richards. Both of them have been vocal about wanting to reform how the HOA operates." We talked for a few more minutes, and Robert thanked me for handling the whole situation with class and professionalism. After we hung up, I felt a sense of closure. What had started as a ridiculous violation notice had turned into a catalyst for real change in the neighborhood. The special board meeting happened the following Thursday. I attended out of curiosity, and so did about 30 other residents. The room was more crowded than I had ever seen it for a regular board meeting. Robert presented the proposal for the pre-approved modifications list, and the discussion was surprisingly civil. Even Brenda seemed subdued, perhaps recognizing that she had lost this battle. The vote was indeed 4-1 in favor, with Brenda casting the sole dissenting vote. The new policy would go into effect immediately, and homeowners would be notified via email and the HOA newsletter. As residents filed out after the meeting, several people stopped to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the board. One older gentleman, whose name I learned was Frank Martinez, told me that he had been considering selling his house because he was so frustrated with the HOA's micromanagement. But now, he had hoped that things might improve. June arrived, bringing warm weather and blooming flowers. The neighborhood was looking particularly beautiful, and I noticed more and more houses sporting new storm doors. Miguel told me that he had gotten at least a dozen jobs from Riverside Meadows residents, all from word-of-mouth referrals, and that he was busier than he had been in years. "I need to send you a commission check or something," he joked during one of our phone conversations. "You've single-handedly expanded my business. Just keep doing great work. That's all the thanks I need." One afternoon in mid-June, I came home from work to find an envelope tucked into my storm door. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. It was from Patricia Whitmore. "Dear Zachary, I wanted to write to apologize again for my role in the storm door controversy. Looking back, I'm embarrassed by how quickly I fell in line with Brenda's interpretation of the rules without doing my own research or thinking critically about whether the enforcement made sense. Your storm door is beautiful, as is mine now, thanks to Miguel's excellent work. More importantly, your willingness to stand up for what was right has made this neighborhood better. The new pre-approved modifications policy is already making life easier for residents, and I'm hearing far fewer complaints about the HOA than I used to. Thank you for having the courage to fight back when it would have been easier to just remove your door and move on. Sincerely, Patricia." I put the note on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet. It was a nice gesture, and I appreciated Patricia's willingness to admit she had been wrong. July brought the neighborhood 4th of July celebration, an annual tradition where the HOA sponsored a picnic and fireworks display at the community park. I usually attended, and this year was no exception. The event was well attended, with families spread out on blankets and kids running around playing games. I was standing in line for a hamburger when Susan Hendricks approached me. "Zachary, I'm glad I ran into you. I wanted to let you know that I've decided not to seek re-election to the board in August." "Oh, why's that?" Susan looked thoughtful. "Honestly, the whole storm door situation made me realize that I wasn't doing a good job. I was rubber stamping whatever Brenda wanted instead of thinking independently about what was best for the neighborhood. That's not the kind of board member I want to be, and I don't think it's fair to residents to keep that seat when someone else might do better." "For what it's worth, Susan, I think you've been great since then. You've supported the reforms Robert proposed, and you hired Miguel to do your storm door, which shows you're willing to admit when you made a mistake. That's kind of you to say, but I've made up my mind. I think fresh perspectives on the board would be good for everyone." The election season started in earnest in late July. Brenda announced she would seek re-election as president, but as Robert had predicted, she faced opposition. Linda Morrison and Tom Richards both threw their hats in the ring, as did a newcomer named Jason Wu, who had moved into the neighborhood just 6 months earlier, but had already made waves by organizing volunteer cleanup days at the community park. The HOA rules allowed for candidates to submit written statements that would be distributed to all homeowners along with the ballot. I read through all 4 statements with interest. Brenda's statement focused on maintaining standards and preserving property values. Linda's statement called for reforming the HOA to be more resident-friendly and less punitive. Tom's statement emphasized transparency and accountability. Jason's statement was all about community building and finding ways to bring neighbors together. Election day was August 15th, with ballots due by 5 p.m. Results would be announced at an evening meeting. I voted for Linda Morrison, feeling that her reform message was exactly what the neighborhood needed. The meeting that night was standing room only. Apparently, word had spread that this was going to be a contentious election, and everyone wanted to be there for the results. Robert Chen, serving as the election supervisor since he wasn't running, took the stage at 7 o'clock sharp. "Thank you all for coming. We had an excellent turnout for this election, with nearly 70% of households submitting ballots. I'm pleased to announce the results. There were 4 board seats up for election: President, Vice President, Secretary, and Treasurer. Robert read through the results one by one. Jason Wu won the Treasurer position. Tom Richards won the Secretary position. Margaret Fletcher, running unopposed for Vice President, was re-elected. Then came the big one: President of the Riverside Meadows HOA. For the position of President, Linda Morrison received 62% of the vote. Brenda Kensington received 38%. Linda Morrison is your new HOA President. The room erupted in applause. I looked over at Brenda, who sat stiffly in her chair, her face expressionless. Linda walked to the front of the room, shook Robert's hand, and then addressed the crowd. Thank you all for your trust and your votes. I promise to work hard to make this HOA more responsive, more reasonable, and more focused on building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. Change won't happen overnight, but it will happen. More applause. As the meeting broke up, dozens of people congratulated Linda and welcomed the new board members. I shook hands with Linda and thanked her for running. You know, Zachary, your storm door fight was what convinced me to run, she told me. I watched you stand up to Brenda, and I thought, if he can do that, I can run for the board. So thank you for being brave enough to fight back. Over the next few weeks, the new board got to work. One of their first actions was to conduct a comprehensive review of the CC and Articus, to identify other areas where the rules were unclear or overly restrictive. They formed committees of volunteer residents to provide input on everything from architectural guidelines to social events to communication practices. In September, the board announced a major revision to the architectural review process. The list of pre-approved modifications was expanded significantly. The timeline for reviewing applications that did require approval was shortened from 30 days to 10 days. And most importantly, the board committed to consistent enforcement, with clear criteria for when violation notices would be issued, and a more reasonable fine structure that emphasized education and compliance over punishment. I attended the meeting where these changes were announced, and the response from residents was overwhelmingly positive. During the public comment period, several people shared stories of previous HOA overreach, and Linda listened carefully to each one, taking notes. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and addressed the board. I just want to say thank you. When I got that violation notice for my storm door back in March, I was angry and frustrated. But looking back now, I'm almost grateful it happened because it led to real change. This neighborhood is a better place now because the HOA is focused on what actually matters rather than petty enforcement of unclear rules. To the new board, thank you for your service and your commitment to doing this right. Linda smiled at me from the front table. Zachary, we should be thanking you. Your willingness to stand up for yourself, to document everything, and to fight back legally set an example that a lot of people have followed. You proved that homeowners don't have to just accept overreach from their HOA, and that's an important lesson. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to change color, life in Riverside Meadows settled into a new normal. The HOA newsletter, which used to be filled with violation notices and warnings, now featured community event announcements and helpful tips for seasonal home maintenance. Linda's board adopted a practice of walking the neighborhood together once a month, not to look for violations but to talk with residents and hear their concerns. Miguel Santos continued to get business from the neighborhood, and he hired an assistant to help with the increased workload. When I ran into him at a local coffee shop in October, he thanked me again for the referrals. That storm door job back in March changed my whole year, he told me. I'm on track to have my best year ever, and it's mostly because of the work I got from your neighborhood. You stood up for yourself, and it ended up helping a lot of people, including me. November brought another unexpected development. I got a call from Margaret Fletcher, asking if I would be willing to serve on the newly formed Communications Committee. The committee's job was to improve how the HOA shared information with residents and gathered feedback. We need someone who isn't afraid to speak up when something doesn't make sense, Margaret told me. You proved back in March that you're willing to do your homework and stand on principle. That's exactly the kind of person we want helping to shape how this HOA communicates. I agreed, and over the next several months, I worked with 5 other residents to completely overhaul the HOA's communication practices. We created a user-friendly website, established a monthly virtual town hall where residents could ask questions, and developed clear, plain language guides to help homeowners understand the CC and Articles without needing a law degree. Winter arrived, and with it came a surprising conversation. I was shoveling snow from my driveway on a Saturday morning in early December when a car pulled up. Patricia Whitmore rolled down her window. "Zachary, do you have a few minutes?" "Sure, what's up?" Patricia parked and got out, walking carefully across the snowy driveway. "I wanted to give you an update on something. Brenda is selling her house and moving out of the neighborhood." "Really? When did this happen?" "She listed it 2 weeks ago and already has a buyer. Apparently, after losing the election, she just couldn't stand being in the neighborhood anymore. She told Susan that every time she drove past your house and saw that storm door, it reminded her of her failure." I didn't quite know how to respond to that. Part of me felt a little bad for Brenda, even after everything she had put me through. But mostly I just felt relieved that the source of so much neighborhood tension would be moving on. "I hope she's happy wherever she ends up," I said, meaning it. Patricia nodded. "You're a better person than I am. I'm just glad she'll be someone else's problem now." She paused. "You know, the whole storm door situation taught me an important lesson. Power is a responsibility, not a weapon. When you're in a position of authority, like being on an HOA board, you have to use that authority to help people, not to control them or make yourself feel important." I think Brenda never learned that lesson, and it cost her. We talked for a few more minutes before Patricia headed home. After she left, I looked up at my storm door, which was covered in a light dusting of snow. It was still as beautiful as the day Miguel installed it, and now, every time I looked at it, I felt a sense of pride. Not just in the door itself, but in what it represented. The importance of standing up for yourself, the power of community, and the possibility of positive change. Christmas came and went, and as the new year approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened since that Tuesday morning in March when Brenda first showed up on my doorstep with her clipboard. A simple storm door installation had turned into a neighborhood-wide movement for HOA reform. 3 board members had asked for my contractor's information after initially voting to force me to remove my door. The HOA president who had targeted me had lost her position and was now leaving the neighborhood entirely. And I had gone from being just another resident to someone actively involved in making the community better. On New Year's Eve, the neighborhood held a community gathering at the clubhouse. It was a casual event, with appetizers and sparkling cider for the adults and activities for kids. I was standing near the refreshments table when Linda Morrison approached me with 2 other people I didn't recognize. "Zachary, I want you to meet Jennifer and David Klein. They just bought Brenda's house and closed yesterday." I shook hands with the couple, welcoming them to Riverside Meadows. "We've heard so much about you," Jennifer said with a smile. Our realtor told us the story about your storm door and how it led to HOA reforms. That was actually one of the things that made us comfortable buying here. We wanted a neighborhood with an active HOA, but not one that would make our lives miserable over little things. Well, I'm glad the story had a happy ending for everyone. Welcome to the neighborhood. As midnight approached and everyone counted down to the new year, I looked around the room at my neighbors, the new board members, and the community that had come together over something as simple as a storm door. It had been quite a year. The following week, I got an email from the HOA that made me smile. It was a newsletter featuring a home improvement spotlight section, and the very first feature was about storm doors. The article explained the benefits of storm doors for energy efficiency and security, included information about the pre-approved styles and colors, and yes, featured a photograph of my house with Miguel's beautiful installation front and center. The article concluded with a quote from Linda Morrison. Storm doors are an excellent example of the kind of home improvements we want to encourage in Riverside Meadows. They improve the functionality and appearance of our homes while maintaining the aesthetic standards our community values. If you're considering a storm door installation, check out our updated architectural guidelines or contact the board with any questions. We're here to help, not to create obstacles. I forwarded the newsletter to Miguel with a note. You're famous. And I bet you're going to get even more business from this. His response came back within minutes. Already got 3 calls this morning. I'm going to need to hire another assistant at this rate. Thank you, my friend. February brought another surprise. The Franklin County Bar Association published an article in their monthly newsletter about HOA disputes and effective resolution strategies. The article, written by Marcus Wu, my attorney, used my case as a primary example of how proper documentation, knowledge of relevant case law, and strategic negotiation could resolve conflicts without lengthy litigation. Marcus sent me a copy with a handwritten note. Thanks for being the perfect client. Your case is now being used to teach other attorneys how to handle HOA disputes effectively. Spring arrived, and with it came the anniversary of the storm door installation that had changed so much. It was a warm afternoon in late March, almost exactly 1 year after Miguel had first installed the door, when I came home to find a small gift basket on my porch. The card read, "Thank you for being a catalyst for positive change in our community. Your courage inspires us all. Your neighbors at 845, 847, and 851 Maple Ridge Drive." I walked over to knock on the door of 845 and met Sarah Thompson and her husband Greg. They invited me in for coffee and explained that they had moved to the neighborhood in January and had heard the legendary storm door story from multiple neighbors. "We wanted to thank you because we just submitted a pre-approved modification form to install a pergola in our backyard," Sarah explained. "The process was simple and quick, and according to everyone we've talked to, that's a direct result of the reforms your situation inspired." As we sat drinking coffee and chatting about the neighborhood, I realized that the impact of standing up to the HOA had rippled out far beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just about a storm door anymore. It was about creating a community where people felt empowered to improve their homes, where the HOA served residents rather than controlling them, and where reasonable voices could prevail over petty authoritarianism. That evening, I stood on my front porch and looked at the storm door, its charcoal gray surface gleaming in the setting sun. The glass panels reflected the street, the trees, and the other houses with their own storm doors, many of them installed by Miguel over the past year. My phone buzzed with a text from Dennis Palmer. "Barbecue at my place tomorrow night. Bring whatever you want to drink. We're celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Great Storm Door Rebellion." I laughed and texted back that I'd be there. The next evening, about 20 neighbors gathered in Dennis's backyard. Someone had made a cake with a picture of a storm door on it, which was both ridiculous and perfect. As we ate and talked and enjoyed the warm spring evening, Patricia Whitmore stood up and clinked her glass to get everyone's attention. "I know this is supposed to be a casual gathering, but I wanted to say a few words. A year ago, Zachary got a violation notice for installing a storm door. That notice was wrong, the enforcement was selective, and the whole situation was ridiculous. But instead of just complying or moving away, Zachary fought back. He did his research, he stood his ground, and he forced us to examine whether our HOA was serving the community or just exercising power for its own sake." She paused, looking around at the assembled neighbors. The answer, as we all know now, was that the HOA had lost its way. But because of Zachary's courage, we fixed it. We have a new board that listens to residents. We have clear guidelines that make sense. We have a community that's coming together instead of being divided by petty disputes. And we have a lot of really nice storm doors. Everyone laughed at that last line. So I want to propose a toast to Zachary Thompson and to the storm door that changed everything. To Zachary, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. I felt my face flush with embarrassment but also with pride. These were my neighbors, my community, and we had built something better together. As the party wound down and people started heading home, Linda Morrison pulled me aside. "I have a question for you, Zachary. Have you ever thought about running for the HOA board? We have 2 seats opening up in the fall election, and I think you'd be an excellent addition." I thought about it for a moment. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. The last thing I wanted was to get more involved with the HOA, but things were different now. The board was functional, reform-minded, and actually trying to serve the community. "Let me think about it," I told Linda. "I'm not saying no, but I want to make sure I have the time to do it right if I commit. That's all I ask. Just think about it." Over the next few months, I did think about it. I continued serving on the communications committee and got more involved in neighborhood activities. I helped organize a community garage sale in June and volunteered at the summer concert series the HOA sponsored in July. In August, I submitted my name for nomination to the HOA board. The election was in September, and I ran unopposed for one of the open seats, receiving 92% of the vote. The other seat went to Dennis Palmer, who had also decided to get more involved. My first board meeting was in October, and as I sat at the long table in the clubhouse meeting room, I thought about how different this felt from the meeting where I had appealed my violation notice. Back then, I had been a homeowner fighting against an unreasonable board. Now I was part of the board, working to ensure that other homeowners would never have to fight the same battles I had fought. The meeting focused on routine business, approving the budget for the next year, discussing plans for holiday decorations, and reviewing a handful of architectural applications. Everything was cordial, professional, and focused on serving the community. It was exactly what an HOA board should be. As winter approached again, bringing the story nearly full circle, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. A storm door installation had led to an HOA battle, which had led to board reform, which had led to community change, which had led to me serving on the very board that had once tried to force me to remove that door. The irony was not lost on me, and neither were the lessons. Stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to fight authority when authority is wrong. And most importantly, be the change you want to see. Don't just complain about problems, work to solve them. In November, Miguel Santos called to tell me he was expanding his business. The referrals from Riverside Meadows and surrounding neighborhoods had been so strong that he was opening a second location and hiring 3 full-time installers in addition to his 2 assistants. "I'm naming my new line of premium storm doors after you," he told me. "The Thompson Collection. Classic, durable, and installed perfectly every time." I laughed. "I don't think I need a storm door named after me, Miguel." "Too late. I already ordered the marketing materials." "You changed my life, man. This is my way of saying thank you." December brought one final surprise. I received a letter from the Ohio HOA Reform Coalition, a statewide advocacy group that worked to promote reasonable HOA governance. They had heard about the Riverside Meadows reforms and wanted to feature our story in their annual report as a case study in how communities could successfully reform problematic HOA practices. Linda Morrison and I were interviewed for the report, along with Robert Chen and Margaret Fletcher. The resulting case study was published in January and distributed to HOAs across Ohio as an example of best practices in community governance. As I read through the case study, I saw my storm door journey distilled into bullet points and lessons learned. But what the case study couldn't capture was the human element. The frustration of that first violation notice, the determination to fight back, the satisfaction of winning, the surprise of seeing former opponents become allies, and the pride of being part of creating real change. On a cold February evening, almost 2 years after this all began, I was leaving a board meeting when Patricia Whitmore caught up with me in the parking lot. "You know, Zachary, I think about your storm door situation a lot. It's become kind of a legend in the neighborhood, but I don't think most people realize how close we came to a very different outcome." "What do you mean?" "If you had just removed the door when Brenda first issued that violation notice, none of this would have happened. We'd still have the old board, the old policies, and the old culture of fear and micromanagement. One person's decision to stand up changed everything. I think it would have happened eventually. There were a lot of frustrated people in this neighborhood." Patricia shook her head. "Maybe, but you were the catalyst. You were the one who said no and made it stick. That gave other people permission to speak up too." We stood in the cold parking lot for another moment before heading to our respective cars. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Riverside Meadows, I looked at the houses with their porch lights glowing and their storm doors protecting front entrances from the winter cold. My house came into view, and there was my storm door, still looking as good as the day Miguel installed it. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment, thinking about the journey that had started with such a simple home improvement project. A storm door is just a door. It's glass and metal and weather stripping. But sometimes a storm door can be more than that. Sometimes it can be a symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority. Sometimes it can be the catalyst for community change. And sometimes it can be a reminder that one person, standing up for what's right, can make a real difference. I got out of the car, walked up to my front door, and opened the storm door with its smooth, quiet hinges. The contractor who installed this door had done excellent work, and 3 HOA board members who had initially voted against me had later hired him because they saw the quality for themselves. That detail still made me smile every time I thought about it. Inside my house, warm and secure behind that storm door that had caused so much trouble and created so much change, I made myself dinner and settled in for the evening. My phone buzzed with messages in the neighborhood group chat, residents discussing plans for the upcoming spring festival and debating the best landscaping companies for yard work. It was a normal evening in a normal neighborhood, but I knew it was more than that. It was a community that had learned important lessons about governance, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. And it had all started with a storm door. As I got ready for bed that night, I walked past the framed copy of my retroactive architectural approval for the storm door, which I had hung in my home office as a reminder of the whole experience. Next to it was the violation notice that had started everything, which I had also framed. Looking at those two documents side by side told the whole story. Unreasonable enforcement challenged and defeated, leading to common sense reform. It was a story I was proud to have been part of, and I knew it would continue to shape the Riverside Meadows community for years to come. The storm door itself, that beautiful charcoal gray installation by Miguel Santos, remained on my front entrance. It protected my home from the elements, improved energy efficiency, enhanced security, and looked absolutely fantastic. But more than any of that, it stood as a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of knowing your rights, and the potential for positive change when ordinary people refuse to accept unreasonable authority. 3 HOA board members had asked for my contractor's information after their own attempts had failed, or after they had realized the quality of the work he had done. That fact alone justified everything I had gone through, proving that I had been right all along about the value and appropriateness of the storm door installation. Years from now, new residents would move into Riverside Meadows and would never know about the great storm door controversy of March 2 years ago. They would simply benefit from the reasonable HOA policies, the clear guidelines, and the community-focused governance that had emerged from that conflict. And that was exactly how it should be. Change doesn't always require grand gestures or massive movements. Sometimes it starts with something as simple as a storm door, a homeowner willing to fight for what's right, and a community ready to support positive change. That was the real lesson of my story, and it was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the frustrating parts. The violation notice, the legal battle, the HOA meetings, the board election, and ultimately my own service on the board had all been part of a journey that had made me a better neighbor, a better community member, and a better person. And every day, when I came home and opened that storm door to enter my house, I was reminded of that journey and the changes we had made together. It was a good reminder to have, and I was glad Miguel Santos had installed it so well that it would last for many years to come.